go towards helping make a really special canine-human match, which of course they need your help, and we should help them as much as we can. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. If you tune into the 5, you're going to get Dana's corny jokes today. You know everyone looks forward to that. Thanks for joining us here on the Daily Briefing. I'm Dana Perino. Here's Shep.
He says he went out for a run and ended up fighting a mountain lion. Now that man in Colorado is about to tell us how he killed a big cat, a mountain lion, with his bare hands. It's going to be live. He's scheduled to share his story. We'll have that for you coming up in just a few moments. Plus, fire in the overhead bin. A vape pen bursts into flames mid-flight. Our reporting begins now.
Now, Shepard Smith reporting live from the Fox News deck.
And we're tracking several major stories at this moment. Lawmakers racing to avoid another government showdown. But even now, it's unclear whether the president will sign the bill. And a judge dealing a major blow to President Trump's former campaign manager. Details on both. But we begin with the Senate confirming President Trump's pick for Attorney General William Barr, now set to lead the Justice Department and oversee the Russia investigation. During his confirmation hearing, Barr pledged under oath that he would not interfere in the special counsel Robert Mueller's work and that he would release as much of the final report as possible. Meantime, the former acting FBI director Andrew McCabe with a blockbuster telling 60 Minutes he made sure the Russia investigation would not vanish should he be fired.
I wanted to make sure that our case was on solid ground, and if somebody came in behind me and closed it and tried to walk away from it, they would not be able to do that without creating a record of why they'd made that decision.
You wanted a documentary record.
That's right.
That those investigations had begun because you feared that they would be made to go away.
That's exactly right.
McCabe is out with a new book. According to 60 Minutes, McCabe confirms a report that the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein offered to wear a wire in his meetings with President Trump. Catherine Herridge reporting live from Washington.
Well, Shep, McCabe went on the record confirming media reporting first broken by the New York Times and then confirmed by Fox News that he believed the Justice Department's second in command was serious about recording the president and invoking the 25th Amendment to remove him from office. And the timing matters here because May 2017 is the pivotal month in the Russia probe. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein was just 2 weeks into the job when President Trump fired FBI Director James Comey. Just 8 days later, Rosenstein appointed the special counsel. McCabe also backs up widespread reporting that after Comey was fired, the FBI launched an obstruction of justice case in addition to the FBI's ongoing investigation into alleged Russia collusion.
I was speaking to the man who had just run for the presidency and won the election for the presidency, and who might have done so with the aid of the government of Russia, our most formidable adversary on the world stage. And that was something that troubled me greatly.
In a statement, the Justice Department seemed to stop short of denying Rosenstein talked about removing the president. Statement reads in part, quote, the Deputy Attorney General never authorized any recording that Mr. McCabe references. Based on his personal dealings with the president, there's no basis to invoke the 25th Amendment. On Twitter earlier today, President Trump hit back, characterizing the former FBI official as disgraced. FBI Acting Director Andrew McCabe pretends to be a poor little angel when, in fact, he was a big part of the crooked Hillary scandal and the Russia hoax, a puppet for leaking James Comey. For some context here, McCabe was fired last year for violating the FBI's ethics code. The Justice Department watchdog referred the case to the U.S. attorney here in Washington for possible criminal prosecution. Shep.
Catherine Herridge reporting live from Washington.
You're
Catherine,
welcome.
thank you. A federal judge has ruled that President Trump's former campaign chairman intentionally lied to prosecutors and a federal grand jury. That's after he pleaded guilty to multiple counts and agreed to fully cooperate with the government. So Manafort broke his plea deal and could spend the rest of his life behind bars. One subject of his lies, his conversations with the Russian operative Konstantin Kilimnik. To date, he's the fourth former Trump aide found to have lied about contacts with Russians. Whether a pardon is in the works, we don't yet know. Jillian Turner reporting live from Washington.
So, Shep, a U.S. district judge ruled in a hearing late yesterday that Robert Mueller's team of special prosecutors have proven now that former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort lied to federal agents and lied to the special counsel's office. Judge Amy Jackson found Manafort continued to lie even after he'd struck a plea deal. He had agreed to share information about the Trump campaign in exchange for a lighter sentencing. But now, in light of Judge Jackson's ruling, that deal's as good as dead. The court, backing up Robert Mueller's findings, writes, the Office of Special Counsel made its determination that the defendant made false statements and thereby breached the plea agreement in good faith. Therefore, the Office of Special Counsel is no longer bound by its obligations under the plea agreement. This opens up the possibility prosecutors may recommend a much heavier sentence. The court found that of 5 issues that are on the table now, Manafort lied about 3, including a $125,000 wire transfer and his contact with a Russian political consultant in August of 2016. A recent court filing error revealed entire sections that were supposed to be blacked out. This resulted in the public revelations that Manafort had shared polling data about the 2016 presidential candidates with Russia. Now, tomorrow morning, the court will release the transcript from yesterday's sealed hearing, and after that, Manafort will face sentencing on March 13th. All of this separate and apart from his legal woes in the state of Virginia, where he's already been found guilty on 8 counts as a result of his trial there, and is also awaiting sentencing. Shep.
Jillian Turner live in Washington. And some breaking news, live look on Capitol Hill. Lawmakers getting a look at the bipartisan bill to pay for some border security and keep the government fully funded past midnight tomorrow. Some members pushing for a temporary extension. They say they need more time to read the more than 1,100-page bill. But hundreds of thousands of federal workers' paychecks hang in the balance. Even if the House and Senate pass this by tomorrow, the big question is, will the president even sign it? Breaking news right now, Mitch McConnell is speaking on this matter live right now, saying that the president is indeed prepared to sign. This has just happened. Listen.
The Committee of Conference on the disagreeing votes of the 2 houses on the amendment of the Senate to the joint resolution HJ Res 31, having met, have agreed that the House recede from its disagreement to the amendment of the Senate and agree to the same with an amendment, and the Senate agree to the same.
Okay, so here's what just happened. While we're doing television here for you, producers are watching all kinds of live events happening. And one of them was, while we were doing this, watching as suddenly Mitch McConnell came up to the microphone, fairly unexpected, and gave the information that now Republicans do expect that the president will sign the bill. Right now, our technicians are re-racking the tape, what amounts to a massive DVR, where we take in all just dozens and dozens and dozens of feeds, and now to be able to re-rack it for you, let's listen.
Cloture vote on the conference report to accompany House Joint Resolution 31 occur at 3:30 today. Further, that if cloture is invoked, all post-cloture time be yielded back and the Senate vote on adoption of the conference report.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Okay, the equipment's having a hitch in its get-along, but I now have the precise language that Mitch McConnell used. Mitch McConnell just said that he had spoken with the president and that the president will sign the bill. He said so definitively that the president will sign the bill. So here's what's about to happen. We know from folks on Capitol Hill that this bipartisan measure has enough support in the House and enough support in the Senate, and that and now we know from Mitch McConnell that when it gets to the president's desk, he will sign it. So they've sort of pushed this through, they've fast-tracked it through so to try to avoid another government shutdown so that employees wouldn't be, wouldn't fail to get their paychecks and the government wouldn't have another problem getting things going. They've just gotten it back up and running again, and there are glitches all in the system. John Roberts is with us. John, we figured this was going to happen, but there was a lot of hemming and hawing.
Well, I don't know that the president has much choice but to sign this bill. I mean, the choice is another government shutdown, or maybe you pass a continuing resolution And Congress could, if forced to, probably come up quickly with a continuing resolution. But I don't know that further negotiation during the course of next week, as was suggested by Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows, may yield anything more than what the president got so far. What we do know is that the team of attorneys here at the White House has been going through every line of the 1,159 pages of this bill. No official reaction from the White House, no early read yet. All we heard from the president was in this tweet where he said, quote, reviewing the funding bill with my team at the White House. What we do know is in the bill is $1.375 billion for pedestrian fencing. That will be built in the Rio Grande sector of the Texas border between the United States and Mexico. $725 million for border security technology, $570 million for non-invasive inspection equipment at ports of entry, as well as $270 million for construction and facility improvements. There's some debate over what the bill would allow to be built. It specifically says that it needs to be steel bollard wall, like the wall that we've seen installed in many places across the border in California. But congressional sources insist that the president can build his steel slat wall, sort of a 30-foot high steel picket fence with a point at the top. The reason why the president wants that design over the bollard wall that has a bar across the top is that somebody trying to get over that fence can throw a rope over the bollard wall and climb up. If you have the steel picket fence, you can't get a rope over it to the point where you'd be able to climb over the top of it. There is some restrictions on where the wall can be built and cannot be built. Some of the places where it cannot be built include the Santa Ana Wildlife Refuge, the Benson Rio Grande Valley State Park, the La Lomita Historical Park, the National Butterfly Center, and some parts of the lower Rio Grande Valley National Wildlife Refuge. And then there's one other provision that the president didn't like in this, and that is that local officials in 4 border towns and 1 census area will have final say on whether the wall can be built in those areas. In Warsaw, Poland today, the vice president weighing in on deliberations over the measure. Listen here.
I think the president's evaluating what's in the bill. He's also evaluating the authority that he has, and I know he'll be making a decision before the deadline this Friday.
One of the president's biggest supporters on border security, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, urging the president earlier today to sign the bill. Listen to what he said.
I think the president's in a good spot. It depends on how they write the language. He's certainly inclined to sign it and move forward. There's some things in there that are good for border security, and let him march toward filling in the gaps by executive action.
But certainly a new development with Mitch McConnell going to the floor of the Senate there just a couple of minutes ago, Shep, to say that he has talked to the president and the president has told him that he will sign the bill. That really is the first indication that we've gotten that the president may have a positive response to this, because for the most part, the president's response has been pretty negative. He likes the overall figure of $23 billion for border security, but there's a lot in this bill he does not like, so it may be that he holds his nose and puts his signature to it. Shep?
Here's the part I missed, John. He's about to declare a national emergency. Of this, we were not aware. Of this, we are confident lawsuits will be coming. Chad Pergram's live up on Capitol Hill. This had been talked about, Chad, our senior producer for The Hill, but it was uncertain whether he would do it because it seems certain that there will be legal challenges.
There will be. He has under the statute the ability, there's about, multiple reasons as to why you can declare a national emergency, and he does have firm ground there. But the thing I would look more carefully at, Shep, is what we call transfer authority. So if you have individual spending bills, and they've only allocated $1.375 billion for the border wall, does he go around Congress and try to move money from, say, account A to account B inside that spending bill without getting the blessing of Congress? Part of the statute says that you have to get a sign-off by the Appropriations Committee. Part of the statute says you can go around that. Or does he, say, take the Department of Homeland Security spending bill and then dip into the military spending bill, the Defense Appropriations Bill, or what we call the VA MILCON, Military Construction Bill, and go across spending bills? That, Shep, could be where there is a greater legal challenge. That's the bigger problem right now. And, the other thing, Shep, that's going to be very important is whether or not this decision to declare a national emergency actually affects the vote count. Now, what we're going to have happen at 3:30 here on the Senate floor is what we call a cloture vote, to end debate on the underlying spending package. Remember, these are 7 spending bills, One of them is for the Department of Homeland Security, and that's the most nettlesome because it has the wall issue there. They need 60 votes to end debate on that, and then go for, if they get 60 votes, then the Senate will vote actually up or down on passage. Here's the other issue. I think it was very significant that Mitch McConnell waited and waited. We thought we might vote earlier on this, but he waited till he had an assurance from the president he would sign the bill to call this vote this afternoon, Shep.
This matter of declaring a national emergency, John Roberts we'll go to John Roberts at the White House in just a minute, but John, this is something, to what degree there is really influence, I don't know, sitting here as one who does the news and doesn't do the commentary, but all the people who are out there making noise for him have said, okay, go ahead and do this, but you better sign a national emergency. How much of an effect has that had? Do we have a way to know?
Well, I think he's got a lot of backup from people like Mitch McConnell. He's got backup from Senator Lindsey Graham, who weeks ago said that the president should give a certain amount of time to negotiations, and if he doesn't get what he wants at the end of the negotiations, declare a national emergency. I just got off the phone with a White House official who says, in fact, that, McConnell spoke to the president, and that's what was said in the conversation. So, I mean, that's a huge piece of news that the president's going to sign this, but at the same time declare a national emergency. Now, Chad was talking about the intricacies of this transfer authority and reprogramming money within certain. It's like, think that you've got a farm. Think of the federal government as a farm, and the farm's got a bunch of silos on it, and each one of those silos is filled with money. And you're allowed to move some money around within each of those silos, and you're also allowed to move certain amounts of money in between the silos. Now, if you declare a national emergency, it gives you greater leeway to be able to move money around in between those silos. And White House attorneys have looked at this for months, this idea of a national emergency, and they have identified certain baskets of money that they believe can be applied to building a border wall. Each time you dip into a different basket, though, you're increasing the level of potential pushback and your potential risk for a legal challenge. So there's some baskets of money they believe they have that they can use, and nobody's going to be able to challenge them. But once they go through those baskets of money and pick up the next basket, that comes with a little more risk. And then each basket after that comes with an increasing degree of risk. So as you move this money around inside, specific silos like the DHS silo, or you move from the DOD silo into the DHS silo, or energy into, just for example, into the DHS silo, you get increasing risk. So it's not clear how much money the president might be able to move around before he ends up in court. But I do know that the OMB Office of Management and Budget here at the White House has identified far more than the $5.7 billion than the president originally wanted in these baskets of money that it believes it can move around. They have to make a decision on to what degree do they risk inviting a legal challenge here, because once you get enjoined, then you run the risk of almost everything getting enjoined in the courts.
I want our viewers to hear what Mitch McConnell said on the floor here.
I've just had an opportunity to speak with President Trump, and I would say to all my colleagues, has indicated he's prepared to sign the bill. He will also be issuing a national emergency declaration at the same time. And I've indicated to him that I'm going to support the national emergency declaration. So for all of my colleagues, the president will sign the bill. We'll be voting on it shortly.
So there's Mitch McConnell. John Roberts, what's the national emergency?
Well, first of all, the reaction is wow. A lot of people thought that the president might use this option, but there was a lot of thought that he probably wouldn't use the option. He has said many, many times that he would rather do it legislatively, but it's clear that the president thought that he could not do it legislatively, so now he's going to declare the national emergency. The national emergency, as the president sees it, is a humanitarian and economic emergency that exists across our southern border. Tens of thousands of people are being apprehended every month by Customs and Border Protection, the Border Patrol, Immigration and Customs Enforcement for crossing over into this country or being in this country illegally. Customs and Border Protection facilities are filled to bursting. There are a lot of family units. There are a lot of unaccompanied children that are coming across the border. And the president believes that the best way to deal with that is to build a border barrier, add an additional 200 and some odd miles of fencing, particularly in Texas. But here's the rub with that. When you're talking about these migrants, these illegal migrants from what are called the Northern Triangle countries of Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and El Salvador, they are people who simply want to get their feet on American soil so that they can be picked up by the Border Patrol. And the president himself, a couple of weeks ago, in response to a question I put to him, acknowledged that because you cannot build a fence right on the border in Texas, you can't build it in the floodplain of the Rio Grande. You have to build it, a couple of 100 yards in. In some cases, the wall is a mile in from the border. All those people have to do is cross the Rio Grande, and in some areas you could float across, in some areas you walk across. And if they get their feet on U.S. soil, they give themselves up to the Border Patrol, they get into the system where by and large they get released into American society. Some of them do return for their appointed court date, some of them don't. Even if they come for their first court date, they very often don't come for their second court date, and so they disappear into American society. So build as much wall as you want in Texas. You're not going to stop the problem of these migrants who want to get caught by the Border Patrol from coming across. Now, where it could help is people who don't want to get caught, who get into the country. That would include people who just want to disappear into American society right away. They don't want to get caught by the Border Patrol. That could include criminal elements. It could include human traffickers. It could include drug smugglers and other people with nefarious intent to get across the border. They would get caught up, ostensibly, theoretically, by this wall, which would give Customs and Border Protection time to get to them before they hit these what are called vanishing points and disappear into the United States. So from that standpoint, it could be beneficial for Customs and Border Protection. But in terms of stopping the flow of migrants who are coming up from Central America who just want to put feet on U.S. soil, it wouldn't do much to stop them. And the president has admitted that. Shep?
All right, John, thanks. Jonathan Swan's with us. He's national political reporter for Axios. And Jonathan, not a secret, discussed by reporters and politicos all over the place, more than a month ago, the discussion was, well, the Democrats are not going to give him the money for a wall because a million reasons they don't like this wall. They're not going to do it. And eventually, he'll just have to declare a national emergency and build it himself. And then he'll get pushback, legal pushback, and he won't be able to do it. He'll be able to say to his base, well, I tried. I did everything I could do. Well, so here we are.
Yeah, here we are, and I think John Roberts did an excellent job laying it all out. A few things that are essential to know. One is this has been moving so fast. I mean, 36 hours ago, when I was talking to senior White House officials, they did not believe, based on their most recent conversations with the president, that he was going to declare an emergency. The word they were all using was reprogramming. They were talking about finding other ways to, through the executive branch, move money around. What this tells me is that Trump is really, really disappointed with that baseline number that they managed to get out of the deal, 1.375. And just to help understand for viewers, the way the White House is thinking of it, think about the money on a spectrum. There's easy money and there's really hard money to access. The White House, Mick Mulvaney, has told people internally that there's about $1 billion thereabouts in easy money, money that is not especially legally problematic or politically problematic. To get to that figure of $23 billion that Trump has thrown out there, you're going to get into some really legally problematic and politically problematic territory. And you're going to get there pretty quickly, by the way. As you even get close to sort of $3 billion, $4 billion, you start taking money from places that will upset members of Congress, people inside the Pentagon, and you're going to have lawsuits abounding. So this is going to be really problematic. They know they're going to be held up in court, but Trump was left with no options. That this was the best deal that Congress, that Republicans on the Hill could negotiate.
The people who talk to him have a big influence on him. We've been told this since long before he was president of the United States. The last people he talked to are, they get a lot of sway. And in this case, those who support him and carry water for him within the airwaves and otherwise have been, they've been very vocal, unhappy. And then the president, according to the reporting of Maggie Haberman and others in the New York Times today, said, the Republicans didn't do a good job negotiating this. They should have leaned on me more. And in the end, it would appear, at least, I'm looking forward to some reporting on it, it would appear that, he found himself in a position that really wasn't going to work for part of his base, as evidenced on the airwaves, and took this extra step that maybe some people, in the end at least, weren't expecting, because they were certainly expecting it 5 or 6 weeks ago.
He is very alert to certainly Sean Hannity on Fox and Laura Ingraham, who's been an immigration hawk for many, many years. Another person who has a lot of influence is Lou Dobbs on Fox Business, who's also have been serious about this issue for a long time and very aligned with the president. So those voices do matter. I think they can be overstated as well. I think that the president really does, this is an issue that he does care about, and I think it's this is one of those issues that's for him a signature issue, and he sees it as definitional for his presidency. So I think it can sometimes be overstated, the effect that these people have. But there's no doubt they talk to him both privately and through the television, and he is definitely sensitive to them as voices that represent the base. Every time this possibility came up, there was the reminder that what happens when a President Harris or a President Biden or a President Gillibrand or, fill in the blank, at some point decides that, global that climate change is a national emergency, and by the way, we're going to go get some money out of these other pots and do this. Is that door now open? Well, it has to be if he does this. It sets a precedent. And I remember seeing a tweet by John Favreau, who used to be President Obama's speechwriter. He was sort of being humorous, but clearly there was an edge of realism to it. He was saying, great, declare the national emergency. I look forward to the future where we declare a climate emergency. He might have said a living wage emergency, XYZ. You can imagine healthcare emergency. You can imagine the different areas of progressive policy that could be activated using this as a precedent. And frankly, that was what was worrying a lot of the conservative lawyers that I was talking to who are close to the White House counsel. They were very worried about this as a precedent. He interrupted Chuck Grassley's speech to do this. And Grassley Mitch McConnell, and Grassley yelled back over at him, "You're rude." But I know, we're in a position now. We're in a position now where you wonder exactly where everything is going to end up. Well, one thing we haven't talked about is what is the effect of Mitch McConnell announcing this on... We haven't had any votes yet, right? We haven't seen the House vote, and we haven't seen... We're about to hear from Nancy Pelosi, too. She's about to speak live. Okay. That ought to be a humdinger. We'll see. Well, I'll be very curious to hear what the reaction is, because this has been one of the other things that people inside the White House have talked about privately, is what happens if Congress knows before they vote that the president is going to do something that most people on the Hill oppose. Is that going to crater the vote, which was already very fragile among Republicans? There's a lot of senators who fiercely oppose national emergency. There's a lot of people in the House that don't want the president, Democrats and Republicans, to use these powers. So what does that mean for this vote? We haven't even seen the effects of that yet. It's going to play out over the next hour or two. Yeah, Steny Hoyer from the Democratic side just weighed in on that on another network, saying declaring a national emergency when there is no national emergency is not good for the president to do, and frankly, I don't think it's good for a precedent. A lot of Republicans share that view. So a can of worms has been tipped over. It has. It has. And again, it's going to have some effect on the vote. The question is how big an effect it is, and is it a meaningful effect? Mike, Jonathan, you're the best. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Yep, Mike Emanuel up on Capitol Hill. Mike, what are you hearing?
Well, Shep, you mentioned Senator Chuck Grassley. I should note that this morning, after the morning prayer and before the Pledge of Allegiance, Senator Grassley said on the Senate floor, let's all pray that the president will have the wisdom to sign the bill so the government doesn't shut down. You've been talking about the national emergency scenario. I've been talking to a lot of Republicans up here on Capitol Hill who do not like that idea because they are worried about the future of a potential Democratic president. And so then they face hypocrisy charges of you were for a national emergency with President Trump. Now you're not for a national emergency if it's President Biden or Harris or whomever. And so there are some concerned about that. But the bottom line is they know the president's frustrated that he's not getting as much money as he wanted. He wanted 5.7. He's going to get 1.375. It's worth noting that this is a fight that will come up again at the end of September. This is only funding a quarter of the government through the end of September, and so they're going to slug it out again, and the numbers may be different next time, but the president doesn't want to wait for that. He's calling for a national emergency now. We've heard Lindsey Graham in recent days saying he thought the president might do some kind of memorandum as he was signing this funding bill, basically saying that he was going to move money around in other areas to get some of this done. But clearly the president wants to go the full step, going with a national emergency. And as you've heard from your guests before, we'll see what the impact is on the vote. I've been talking to many members on both sides of the aisle, House and Senate. They both seem comfortable with the vote total before all this. The wild card was whether the president was going to say he was opposed to it. If so, we were expecting to see the whole thing come tumbling down, evaporate before our very eyes. But at this point, a lot of folks here on Capitol Hill are saying if the president will sign it, there should be plenty of votes to get it across the finish line, and we'll all be listening to what Speaker Nancy Pelosi has to say.
Yeah, and I've been given word that she's less than a minute away now. Okay. But you wonder, if you're the president and you're looking at this, you're like, all right. I mean, reality is, a year or so ago, he could have had $25 billion and turned it down. And then he asked for whatever, 5.7, and then it was 1.7 offer from the Democrats, and then it was 1.3, and then somehow you're supposed to try to push that together and roll it and spin it and churn it out and twist it and turn it into something vaguely resembling a win. And it really didn't matter if you put it on that machine down there on the Jersey Shore and pulled it like taffy and twisted it and packaged it and put a bow on it and dipped it in chocolate. It's not a win. It's just that's not what a win. If it walks like a loss and quacks like a loss, it's just a loss. And it was a loss, and the president said, I don't want a loss. He's like, national emergency. So here we go. And now we'll hear from Nancy Pelosi on it. What's the time clock on that now there in the booth? I'm sitting out here. We're still in the 2-minute warning. It's been 2 minutes. You know what 2 minutes is in Washington? It's a suggestion. Mike, how much of an effect might this have on the vote? You got to have 60 in the Senate, right?
Absolutely right. And a lot of the Democrats were saying, look, this keeps the government open. That's what they want to do. It basically keeps the president in check in their view. And so some of them were very cool with that. And so let's go to Pelosi.
Well, doesn't look like Pelosi to me.
This is Capito.
She walked up and walked away. She walked into frame and then walked out of frame. Of course, there she is again. Here we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming later in the day. As you probably are aware, this morning we celebrated the life of Chairman John Dingell at Holy Trinity Church in Georgetown. And right now, many of our colleagues are in North Carolina to, again, celebrate the life of Walter Jones, our colleague from North Carolina, a beautiful, lovely man. I served with him and served with his father. Two different parties. His father, a Democrat,
I'm here in the press conference. You can come back.
A Republican, but both of them Southern gentlemen, patriotic Americans, both of the Joneses, and certainly Walter Jones and John Dingell. Today is also a day of sadness because it marks the 1-year anniversary of the Parkland tragedy of gun violence. 1 year ago, America's heart was broken by the horrific act of violence in Parkland, Florida. Today, we remember the 17 lives that were stolen from us then. I'm very pleased that last night, this House Judiciary Committee under the leadership of Jerry Nadler and with the full participation of our members, took a strong step to end the epidemic of gun violence, and they advanced H.R. 8, the bipartisan common sense background check legislation. Our committees are hard at work. I'm very proud of our freshmen. I think I've said to you before that in this freshman class, we have 18 chairs of subcommittees. To contrast that to the another historic freshman class, the Watergate Babies, when they came in with all of the size and enthusiasm that they didn't have one subcommittee chair in the first year that they took office. So we're very proud that 18 of them have gavels. By all accounts from our chairman, they come enthusiastic, well prepared. All of the members, and especially, of course, our subcommittee chairs. So we're very hard at work on our For the People agenda while we're waiting for the Senate to pass the conference report, the bipartisan, bicameral conference report, which I understand is imminent in the Senate, and then we'll vote on it later today. So that's real progress, I think, for us to have left it to the appropriators to make the decisions, come up with a bicameral, bipartisan bill that we can overwhelmingly support. But at the same time, we are working on our For the People agenda. For the People agenda, first and foremost, said it was going to lower health care costs by lowering the cost of prescription drugs. We've already had committees, the Ways and Means Committee and the Oversight Committee, Government Reform and Oversight Committee have already had hearings on the price of prescription drugs. Our second point in the For the People agenda was to lower health care costs, bigger paychecks by building the infrastructure of America. And again, last week, the Transportation Infrastructure Committee held a hearing with representatives of the private and public sector, Mayor of Los Angeles representing our nation's mayors, Governor Walz representing our governors, and others participating there. Third point For the People agenda is H.R. 1 to reduce the role of big, dark, special interest money in politics, lower voter suppression, and increase the voice of everyday Americans in our political system, to restore confidence in our political system. And we've already had an outside of Washington hearing under the leadership of Marcia Fudge in Brownsville, Texas, with great participation from our members, including our distinguished with Mr. Clyburn participating. And here this week, we've had the Homeland Security Committee having a hearing on H.R. 1 and as it relates to the integrity of our elections. And we have the House Administration Committee having a hearing on that as well. Again, part of our H.R. 1, 2, 3, the first 10 resolutions of the House, the first 10 bills, we're very pleased how we're advancing For the People agenda, but also H.R. 8, the gun violence prevention bill. Probably, I think they may report out scheduled to report out that bill, and then Mr. Clyburn's initiative on the fix for South Carolina, which has bipartisan, bicameral support. Just a word further on the agreement that we will be voting on later today. In addition to the pieces on Homeland Security, which are very important. And by the way, the Homeland Security budget is a big budget. It's not just about the Mexico border. It's about ice cutters off of Alaska and the other parts of our border that are not necessarily just the southern part. And I'm very pleased that some long advocated for pieces are now in that budget as well. So when you talk about the size of the budget, it's broader than the U.S.-Mexico border. But the bill that we will be passing is a long overdue pay raise for federal employees to make them on a par with military employees as they had always been. An additional $1 billion for the census to combat the administration's assault and to ensure a fair, accurate count. $3 billion to keep communities safe by combating the opioid epidemic and hiring more police officers. $17 billion to rebuild America's infrastructure. Billions of dollars in support of small businesses. More than $9 billion to protect clean air, clean water, and public lands. $9.1 billion in security assistance for our allies, and $7.4 billion for global health and nutrition assistance. So this is a very important legislation. We have the 6 appropriations bills that were not agreed to and not as controversial, and then the Homeland Security bill, which produced the result that today we will keep government open, and that's very important for the American people, but we will also, as we do so, protect our borders and protect our values. Yes, ma'am.
The president just said that he will declare a national emergency when he signs this bill. Do you still plan to file a legal challenge if and when he does that, and how quickly it can be?
Did I ever say I was filing a legal challenge?
You said Democrats.
I may. That's an option, and we'll review our options. But it's important to note that when the president declares this emergency, first of all, it's not an emergency. What's happening at the border? It's a humanitarian challenge to us. The president has tried to sell a bill of goods to American people. But putting that aside, just in terms of the president making an end run around Congress, here he said, let us respect what the committee will do, and then walks away from it. But in any event, the president is doing an end run about Congress, about the power of the purse. You've heard me say over and over again, Article 1, the legislative branch, the power of the purse, the power to declare war, many other powers listed in the Constitution, and, of course, the responsibility to have oversight. So the president is doing an end run around that. We will review our options. We'll be prepared to respond appropriately to it. I know the Republicans have some unease about it, no matter what they say, because if the president can declare an emergency on something that he has created as an emergency, an illusion that he wants to convey, just think of what a president with different values can present to the American people. You want to talk about a national emergency? Let's talk about today, the one-year anniversary of another manifestation of the epidemic of gun violence in America. That's a national emergency. Why don't you declare that emergency, Mr. President? I wish you would. But a Democratic president can do that. Democratic president can declare emergencies as well. So the precedent that the president is setting here is something that should be met with great unease and dismay by the Republicans. And of course, we will respond accordingly when we review our options. First, we have to see what the president actually says. Yes.
To that end, there's been some discussion of a resolution in the House that might force Republicans to go on the record and vote against it. Would that be an option?
I'm saying that we are reviewing our options, that we have to see what the president will say. This, I don't believe that there's any good faith negotiations to have with the Republicans in Congress if they're going to support the president doing an end run about what the will of the people, the Congress of the United States, has put forth. So we will review our options, and I'm not prepared to give any preference to any one of them right now. Yes, sir. Yes.
On the news of the past couple of moments that the president told the Senate Majority Leader that he would sign the bill, you must be pleased with that. But on the national emergency, does that change the vote calculus at all? Obviously, if you have the president saying he's going to sign a piece of legislation, people would say, okay, I would vote for that, but also that caveat that could potentially peel votes away. Does that have any impact?
Let's just have the vote, Chad. That's very interesting, but let's just have the vote.
That changes the support one way or the other.
Well, it may, I don't know, it's probably had more of an influence in the United States Senate. We have the votes in the House. But it is interesting to see how the president has said to the Republican leadership in the Senate, Senator Shelby, a senior appropriator, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee there, respected leader in the United States Senate. I don't have confidence in what you did, even though the president failed to convince the American people and their representatives in Congress of his position. But let's just see what the votes are. Who knows what the calculus is on the other side? I don't.
Doesn't affect your side of the aisle, though.
No.
Madam Speaker, as far as the gun control bill, or rather, the background check bill is concerned, you just said that a national emergency should be declared.
Well, it could be declared. If you want to talk about emergencies, that's a national emergency.
Is that something that you would like to see a president declare?
No, I'm just saying a president could do that. If you want to go down that path, then let's look at what really is a national emergency. I'm not advocating for any president doing an end run around Congress. I'm just saying that the Republicans should have some dismay about the door that they are opening, the threshold they are crossing.
Madam Speaker, in your opening comments, you spoke some about the freshman class.
Yes.
I was just wondering, there have been a number of viral moments with some of these new Democratic members.
No, that's the word, isn't it? Viral. That's your questions now, that viral moments of the freshmen.
establishment have an outsized influence that you've never seen before?
No. This is a welcome to the Democratic Party. We are not a rubber stamp for anybody. We are not a monolith. We never have been. And who would want to lead a party that would be described that way? The members come, they bring their enthusiasms, their priorities. We welcome that, and they're not programmed. They are spontaneous, prepared, and I'm proud of them. Okay? Yes, sir.
And you mentioned the anniversary of Parkland several times.
Yes.
And the legislation you're bringing to the floor.
Yes.
It enjoys broad support.
Yes.
Other legislation to that end, not quite as popular around the country, although it's more popular among the Democratic caucus than probably ever. Are you committed to bringing to the floor some further legislation to that end, such as the restoration of the ban on the style weapon?
Well, the committee, the Judiciary Committee and the committees of jurisdiction will review any proposals that we have on any subject, and what they have prioritized. And we have, in addition to the committee, we have a task force headed up by Congressman Mike Thompson of California has worked in a bipartisan way to protect the American people. What are the measures that save the most lives? And how do we get them into law? A proposal that turns into legislation, that it passes as law, that makes a difference in the lives of the American people. And it's up to the committee and the task force to make their proposals as we go forward. We do think that keeping guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them probably saves the most lives.
Thank you.
Oh, happy Valentine's Day. All we need is love and chocolate, right?
What time are you voting? Can we still go to Valentine's Day dinner?
That would be the hope. It depends on how soon the Republicans. We 6:30 because that's when our members come back from North Carolina. But we hope not to have it be 1 minute after that.
So there you go, Nancy Pelosi on the matters of the day, the Senate to vote at some point soon, then the House to vote. We now know from the White House that the president will sign the bill once it's passed, and we've just gotten a statement from Sarah Sanders, the president's spokesperson, as he has stop at the great country. So what of all of this? The legal matter. I just received a communication from Judge Andrew Napolitano, our chief judicial analyst, and he sends the following, pretty concise, quoting Judge Napolitano, the Constitution could not be clearer. All appropriations, in this case to purchase by eminent domain the land on which to construct the fence and to build the fence, must be expressly approved by Congress, which it has not done. The judge goes on, this will be enjoined by the first judge to hear a challenge to it. In other words, national emergency will be declared, and the courts will say no, and the president will be able to say, I did everything I could do, blame it on the Democrats. Let's turn to Brett Baer, anchor of Special Report, our chief political anchor, and live with us from Washington. Brett, what do you think?
Well, I think that this, the first part was ordained, that he didn't like what was in the bill, and that he was likely going to hold his nose and sign it. The second part about the national emergency, I think, developed today as they read, according to two sources, they read the specific 59-page bill and realized not only was it less than the president wanted, significantly less, but it also had handcuffs, legislative handcuffs in the bill itself. There are 354 times in the bill it says none of these funds, no such funds, or none of these amounts can be used for XYZ. In other words, for your wall or barrier or whatever you're going to spend it on. So it was kind of extraordinary that there were legislative efforts to handcuff the ability of the administration who wanted to move pots of money around to make this wall a little bit more money for the wall or barrier. That was restricted. And I think that the White House and the president got to the point where they decided national emergency was the way to go. Obviously, as you've mentioned before, also a hat tip to his base saying, I got you covered, I'm still fighting for the wall. But the legal challenge will come.
And what are we expecting? Nancy Pelosi playing things pretty close to the vest there, Brett, and suggesting maybe some of the numbers on the Republican side will change, because it's not a secret that some Republicans think this idea of declaring a national emergency is not a perfect one.
I don't think they'll change on the bill itself. They may have several Republicans that stand up and say, I don't agree with this declaration of a national emergency, because as she noted, it does open door to other possibilities for other presidents. But it's also worth noting that 30 national emergencies have been declared since President Carter. President Obama had several of them, and it is an executive order that you can move forward with. But as the judge rightly points out, the Constitution is clear about the spending of money, the appropriation of money coming from the House in Congress.
I remember having these discussions long before the government shut down, Brett, with folks who were regulars around your town, saying, well, here's how this has to play out. He has to do everything he can do. There's no way the Democrats are going to give him a dime for a wall. They're just not going to do it. And in the end, he's just going to have to go, I tried, national emergency, oops, enjoined by the court. Well, I tried, and they'll fight the national emergency all the way to 2020, and he'll be able to carry the flag of fighting for the wall, and Democrats will be able to say, we did give him the wall, and away we go.
That's right. I think in the meantime, he can move some money. And before the court enjoins anything or prevents him from moving any money around, there will be at least one or two pots that get shifted, and maybe that means 50 or 100 miles more of wall.
Even if it's only 100 yards of wall, you could put a webcam up there and stream it for the world to see and use it for 2020.
Listen, this is clearly one of the pillars he's going to run on in 2020. I said earlier today, I think it's immigration, fighting socialism, probably abortion, late-term abortion, and the economy, hoping the administration is that the economy is still churning by the time you get to 2020.
And does he prefer someone on the political left or someone more centrist like Klobuchar? I mean, what works better for him?
Political left, 100%. He is, they are frothing at the mouth about the prospect of Elizabeth Warren or Cory Booker or, frankly, Kamala Harris, too, maybe less so. But I think that the biggest candidate who they're afraid of is Joe Biden. And, you know, Klobuchar fits some of that. I think that Mike Bloomberg, you know, potentially, but he would have a tough time in this current Democratic primary, I think, you know, running the gauntlet.
Is there word on how the Democrats plan to respond to this action now? We didn't get anything from Nancy Pelosi, not surprisingly.
I think they're going to be very loud, but first they're going to pass this bill because they don't want a government shutdown. You know, no matter what anybody says about the upside of the government shutdown and moving the needle about the issues, it was pretty heinous across the board. Both sides of the aisle came to the point where they are not going to go over this abyss again after that 35-day shutdown. And you know, if you're one of the people who didn't get the check, eventually it came around. Yes, you got paid, but it was not a pleasant thing. And I think both sides really were going to the wall, to not to use a pun, to make sure it didn't happen.
Yeah. The next week, I guess this waits until Monday, because you got tomorrow, this process lasts through tomorrow. I guess Nancy Pelosi said they're not going to vote till at least 6:30 tonight.
Right, so it gets out tonight. The president, depending on what he wants to do, maybe there will be some ceremony in which he does both. He signs and gives the national emergency. He does have until Tuesday, 9 a.m., since there's a holiday on Monday.
Yeah. So what's your lead story?
Well, I think this might be it, Shep.
I figured it.
I think it might be. It's listen, this is a crazy town when you get to the final moments of legislative back and forth. But this president adds a whole different element to it, and we're one tweet away from, you know, the whole thing changing again.
Waiting for it. Brett Baer, you're the best. We'll see you tonight at 6 Eastern, 5 Central.
See you, Shep.
All right. John Roberts is out in the yard there at the White House. John, any incoming on this yet?
Nothing yet from the White House other than the statement that we saw from Sarah Sanders. But just to buttress what Brett said as to whether this will be the lead story, it's still early.